Hope everybody's having a nice conference. I'm Matt Kropp, Senior Partner at BCG and the CTO for BCG X. You've probably heard of BCG. We're a 35,000 person strategy consulting firm. You might not have heard of BCG X. We have 3,000 engineers and data scientists that are building AI solutions with our clients. So we're right in the forefront of using AI, generative AI, agentic AI, solving our clients' biggest problems for the largest companies in the world. I always like to start just with this quote. And I'm going to talk to you as if you're a client. I know many of you are technologists, and so maybe I'm sharing a bit of my pitch, and you can use it with your clients. But I always like to start with this quote: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Because I think it's really helpful when we're thinking about AI to think about it as a little bit of magic. AI is growing at an exponential pace, and we humans don't think in exponentials. We think in linear extrapolations. And so when you have an exponential, it always curves away from the linear. So we will always be surprised by how capable AI is. And so having that sense of wonder that you get when you experience a magic trick, I think is helpful when we're thinking about where AI is going. So I want to start with just an example of that. If you remember, and seems like a long time ago, 2021, this was the first DALL image generator that OpenAI put out. And at the time, I thought this was magic. You could prompt this model, and you could say, come up with a chair that looks like an avocado, and it would come up with these images. They look horrible, but they look like an avocado and a chair. And so that was magic at the time. We had never before had software that could take a text prompt and imagine something in the real world. So now fast forward to today. I asked DALL yesterday to create an avocado chair, and I got this video that looks like it's out of Architectural Digest. 4 years. In 4 years, we have gone from that very crude image to this smooth video coming out of AI. And so we need to be thinking not about what can AI do today, we need to be thinking about where is it going. There was a paper last year, this was the situational awareness paper, some of you have probably read this. Aschenbrenner was an OpenAI researcher. He put together a model extrapolating the power of AI models. And what he said is that there are three things happening. One is more and more investment in compute. The second is models getting more efficient. And then the third is what he called unhobbling, the idea that we would come up with step changes in the ways that we use these models, the way that we build models. And the result of those three things would get us 10,000 times more power in 3 years. So imagine the power of all of the models that we're using today, ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera. Imagine that 10,000 times more powerful. And what he said was, with 10,000 times more power, we end up with a model that essentially is at PhD level expertise on every topic in 3 years. I went back and checked. We're on this trajectory now. So he published this a year ago. We're still on this trajectory. So we need to be thinking forward. We need to be thinking not what can the models do today, not, as the previous speaker said, your customers have bad experiences with bad chatbots. That's what they think. They're not bad chatbots anymore, and they're not going to be in the future. So I'm going to talk mostly about agents and where we're going with agentic development. So agentic AI is all about the next evolution of generative AI. So we've gone from machine learning, deep learning, creating transformers. The key thing we have now with agents is this ability for models to observe, take in information, come up with a plan, and then take action using tools, and then iterate. This means we're now out of workflows that are rigid and rules-based into workflows that are driven by reasoning and logic, driven by our LLMs. And that unlocks a whole new world of possibility. So where does this go? And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how do you take technology and use it to change business, use it to change workflows, use it to change the way that people work. And what we think will happen, and we think this will happen quite quickly, We go from a state today where you have core platforms, systems of record, systems of engagement, data, and you have our humans that are interacting with those systems to accomplish tasks, to accomplish workflows. We will move to a state where there is a layer of AI agents between the humans and the systems. So we have AI agents interacting with our systems of record, pulling data, taking action, and that the human workers essentially play more of an orchestrator role. I now, as a human worker within a company, have a fleet of agents that are operating for me, that I'm giving instructions to, and they're carrying out tasks. And the benefit of this, obviously, is much more productivity, much less toil for the human, and a very different kind of work environment. Of course, we're going to have to figure out how to manage this, and we're very much on the beginning of this journey, but there's going to be a lot to be learned, and so I'm going to talk about some of that today. I think it's maybe appropriate for a minute. We've just run a survey. We do a IT buyer survey on a couple times a year basis. We just ran it a couple weeks ago because we wanted to understand what's the impact on tariffs, and so maybe this is where you pull out your smartphone and take a picture. I think the challenging news for many of us in this room is that IT spend projections are actually pulling back. So in this survey, we're asking IT buyers, how much are they spending? How much are they expecting to spend? On what categories are they spending? Will they expect their spend to increase or decrease? And so post the last few months of tariff announcements, we are actually seeing a reduction. We had projected a 4% growth in IT spend. That's now at 2.4%. You have an increase in the number of IT buyers saying that they are going to decrease their spend. That's the bad news. The good news, and hopefully for most of those in the room, is that AI and machine learning spending is still expected to grow. This is the one category where IT buyers today are saying we are still expecting to continue to make expansion in investments. So good for all of us. Now, we're working with companies across all sectors, and everybody has been piling into using generative AI. I've been speaking about GenAI with companies for the last 3 years. After ChatGPT launched, in particular, our phone was ringing off the hook with our clients calling us and asking, how should we employ this technology? And we've seen a few evolving waves of how companies are investing. 2023, they hadn't planned any budget for GenAI. It was a new thing. So there wasn't a lot of investment. There was a lot of learning and experimentation. 2024, companies really moved into building POCs. You saw this phenomenon of 1,000 flowers blooming. So every department had their GenAI initiative. There were lots of chatbots being built. There was not a lot of impact. And increasingly, toward the end of last year and now this year, our clients are asking, how do we get impact? We understand this technology is amazing. We're seeing pockets of it. We see the promise of it, but we're not yet seeing the impact on the bottom line. So how do we get that? And the big focus we see now is companies focusing on what we're calling the big rocks. What are the couple of places that you can put a significant investment and you can get a significant ROI? How do you actually change a process? And so some examples here across different sectors. Banking, there's a big focus on customer service, a big focus on customer relationships. So you think about wealth managers, automating those processes, providing wealth managers, for example, with agents that prep them ahead of talking to their clients, that summarize their client calls, that proactively create follow-up emails out to their clients after they've talked with them. So automating a lot of the toil of their job. In pharma, we're seeing applications in R&D, so drug discovery, new molecule discovery. We've been doing some really interesting work around using agents to write regulatory filings, so these massive documents that typically take 5 months or so for a medical writer to put together. We have agents now that can essentially write the whole document within a matter of minutes. You still have a human that reviews them. These are very technical documents, but it's quite incredible what the agents can do, and essentially automate a huge amount of that process. Consumer products, we see a huge focus on marketing. So personalization, targeted marketing to customers, but also automating the content generation workflow. If you're a big marketing buyer, if you're a big brand, for example, that spends billions of dollars with agencies, a bunch of that spend is non-working spend, the creation of creative. Many of our clients are now taking that work and bringing it in-house. Rather than having their agencies create 10,000 variations of an ad, they're using GenAI tools to generate the 10,000 variants on an ad. Gives them more control, reduces their spend, but it also makes it much faster so they can turn around campaigns in much less time, going from 6 months, say, down to a few weeks. It also means they can create much more content, and so they can actually, if you think about social media advertising, they can have a much more richer campaign, much more targeted campaigns. In insurance, we're seeing insurers use AI and agents for claims, for customer support, for underwriting. We did a project with a major commercial insurer where they took the underwriting process, which is the core of the insurance process, automated all of the content collection, so collecting the documents, reading reports, summarizing those reports so that the underwriter had a very concise, summarized set of information that they could make decisions on. This wasn't about reducing the number of underwriters. What it ended up doing was shortening the time to produce a quote for insurance from a week or two down to a matter of hours. They started winning more business because they could quote faster than their competition. And they were able to quote every piece of business that came to them, whereas before they had been rate limited because of the number of underwriters that they had. So many, many examples that are happening across industries. But we're still very much early in the journey. So we run a different survey called Build for the Future, which benchmarks maturity across a whole number of dimensions for companies in AI. It looks at technology maturity, their strategy, their people, their processes, their responsible AI policies, et cetera. And then we compare the maturity of the companies with their financial performance, with their total shareholder return. And what we see is there are some companies that are really leading, truly leading, the AI future-built companies, and they have outsized returns. They're getting 2x the ROI on their AI projects, and they have 1.5 up to 2 times more total shareholder return, higher profits. Every measure is better. The companies that are leading in AI are leading financially. But the vast majority of companies are not leading. Most are still in the early stages of maturity. So that's a great opportunity for many of us because there's a whole transformation effort that needs to happen. But we're just starting to see the benefits of AI within the industry. So I want to talk about 2 things to get us there. How do we get to the impact? And the first is we need to pick the right places to focus. What is it that we're going to build with AI? And then the second, I'm going to talk about the people, because if you don't get the people to use the tools, you don't get any impact. So there are 3 places that we're seeing companies successfully deploying and getting value from AI. And you think about it as deploy, reshape, invent. Deploy is just deploying tools. All of the software that we're using, all of the systems that we're already using are building generative AI and agentic tools into their products. And if they aren't, they're not going to be around for much longer. So the first thing the organizations need to look at is, how am I going to deploy these tools? And this is going to be things like ChatGPT, this can be things like Office Copilot, this can be things like Agentforce from Salesforce, et cetera. But every one of our software tools is going to become AI-powered, agent-powered. We have to teach our people, though, how to use those tools and how to use them effectively. And we have to change our processes so that we can take advantage of those tools. The second area that we're focusing on is what we're calling reshaping functions. And so the idea here is just deploying a tool, just giving you a chatbot, doesn't change the way people work. And it doesn't give you bottom line impact. It's helpful. I definitely can get access to my HR data faster. I get better answers. But if I don't actually change how people are working, I'm not taking any value to the bottom line. And so the key here is to think about end-to-end processes, end-to-end workflows. How do I look at all of HR? How do I look at my recruiting process, for example? Or in marketing, my whole content generation process. In supply chain, how do I look at the end-to-end process of ordering and fulfilling? And then redesigning that process with AI in mind. Automating the parts of that work that are toil, that are low value added human activities that we can automate, and then taking that work out. It's much more than just deploying a tool. It's about actually rethinking the process. And then the third area is inventing new offerings. We have this technology. We have this amazing technology we didn't have 2 years ago. If you think about it, what can this technology do? It can talk to you in natural language. We didn't have the ability before to have a truly conversational interface. It understands the world. These models have been trained on essentially all public domain data, so they know about every single topic. What can we do with that? When we build a product on top of that, how can we take advantage of the fact that we have this knowledgeable model? They have creativity. Again, in the past, have we been able before to create a video of an avocado chair by a text prompt? That was not possible. And they have reason and logic, this ability to think through a plan and a plan of attack. So now that we have those capabilities in software, how do we build a new product from it? And so, for those of you that have software companies, I'm sure you're already doing this. You probably wouldn't be here if you weren't. But for every company, what are the services that you're taking out to your customers? How can you enhance those services with generative AI and with agents? How are you interacting with your customers? How can you change the way that you interact? There's not a lot that has been done in this space yet, but this is going to determine the winners in categories in the future. I also just want to point out, we need to be thinking about more than AI for cost reduction. And there's been a real focus, the generative AI sort of came into being right at a moment when corporate America and enterprises around the world all started focusing on cost reduction. And so there's sort of a natural inclination, especially because we think about AI as being about automation, right? So there's a natural inclination to say, let's use this to reduce cost. And that's certainly one element of it. But if we only think about how do I replace human workers, we miss many opportunities to take advantage of the technology. And so I think it's important to think across 4 dimensions here. So one is, how do we use AI to reduce human toil? And that's cost reduction. If I have a lot of manual effort, if you're have a manual processing of documents, if you have lots of people on the phone in a call center answering questions, or if you have to staff up the HR department because you have so many queries that you're dealing with, automating that toil, removing it, and giving it to AI agents will definitely reduce cost. But you also have to think about, how do we improve human productivity? So there are places where you're still going to have the human. How do you make the time that they're spending much more productive? I'll talk about software development in a minute, and this is a great example. But I'll just give the example here. I talk to CIOs about using generative AI in software development. And generally what I hear is that they expect that they're going to take out 15 to 20% of the cost at most in software development. And often what I will hear is they will say, my developers only spend 20 or 30% of their time coding, and I can only expect 20% lift from using these tools. So that's 20% times 20%. I'm only going to get 4 or 5%. productivity out of using these tools. That's the wrong frame. Because if I can have that developer in that time write 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, 50 times more code, I'm getting much more than a 20% lift in performance. So how do we think about AI as something that scales human and makes them much more productive? We also can see, and I'll talk about this in a second, an increase in human quality, the quality of our work. And then finally, how do we surpass human scale? There are applications where you would love to staff a human, but we're too expensive, and so we don't do it. In healthcare, there have been experiments around using a call center with nurses pre-op and post-op to check in with patients, make sure that they're prepared for their procedure, after the procedure, make sure that they're following up, make sure that they're taking the right medications, et cetera. The outcomes that you get by doing this are tremendous, but it's too costly to deploy humans to do that follow-up. Now, providers are starting to deploy AI agents. Completely possible. It is now, and it is, from a cost perspective, you can do it. So now I get this outcome that I couldn't have had before because I couldn't have scaled the humans to do it. When we look at the companies that are in that AI forward category, the ones that are really excelling, they are spending much more of their effort on the inventing new offerings, and on the reshape than the deploy. When we look at the companies that are lagging, they're spending most of their time just trying to get tools deployed. So think about moving forward to inventing those new offerings. So what does the workforce of the future look like? And this is a DALL image. I thought this would be a good way to represent it. Many more agents doing work than humans. That's where we're going. But there's one big problem, and this is the biggest barrier, potentially, to getting real impact. And that is the humans actually have to participate. We need to get adoption. It's not enough to deploy the technology. In some cases, if I'm 100% automating a process, if I can take out calls that are going to the call center and redirect them and have them handled by a bot, sure, that takes out the work. I don't need to worry about adoption. I can have fewer humans answering the calls. But most of the cases, most of the places where we'll be using AI, it's actually going to be augmenting human workers. And so the human worker has to be willing to use the AI. And we're seeing a lot of early signs that the humans are not very willing to use the AI. So I want to start with a little bit of motivation about why do we care, and give some evidence that it's actually worth going after. We did a study, this was last year, BCG with Harvard, Wharton, MIT, where we took 750 knowledge workers, and we started by giving them a test. So, you're sort of a competency test. That's the graph on the top, and as you would expect, you have some people that are better and some people that are worse. You get a bell curve. That's a typical thing that you would see with human workers. And then we gave them a task, and this task was kind of a typical business task. It was come up with some product ideas, create a business plan, create a marketing plan. We gave half of them ChatGPT, and half of them had to do it without ChatGPT. And as you would expect, the ones that used the AI were faster. So they got their tasks done 25% faster. They completed 15% more work. The surprising thing was the quality of their output was 40% better than the workers that were not using the AI. And the other thing, and you see this in this bottom graph, the light green bars, those were the bottom half performers, and the dark green were the top half. With the AI tool, the bottom performers performed as well as the top performers. So it brought everybody up to the same level. So we need to be, as I said, we need to not just be thinking about how does this create productivity, we need to think about how does this create quality, and how does this upskill or bring up our new joiners, our less productive employees. You think about, as you have an organization where you're bringing in people, the less tenured folks are the less productive because they're not as experienced yet. Points to this idea that we can actually lift up their performance and make them perform similar to the more experienced people. So that's just about using AI in knowledge work. Now let me talk about moving toward using agents. And so we're spending a lot of time right now in software development because this is really it's the leading edge. This is where the tools are the most mature, the users are essentially the most receptive, and we've seen a lot more deployment than we have in other functions. And so many companies now are working on deploying things like GitHub Copilot and other tools, Cursor, Codium, Q, et cetera. But what we're seeing is there's deployment, but then there's not a lot of benefit. And so when we dig into that, and this is work that we did with a large bank, they rolled out GitHub Copilot to 10,000 engineers. This was last year. And then we measured what happened. And so they did some training. They did some hackathons. They did some promotion to get people interested in using the tool. But you see two things that came out of this. So the blue line were their best coders. The top 5% of their coders doubled productivity in 4 months after adopting GitHub Copilot. So not 10% improvement, not 20% improvement, doubled productivity. And we're seeing in other cases where we're deploying even more advanced tools, even higher multiples. So the benefit is there, but that was only 5% of the coders. 60% of the coders, that's the white line, had zero impact, no increase in productivity. And the reason is a pretty easy reason, because they just didn't use the tool. And so one thing to be very careful of here, you will have vendors, and I won't name anybody, but vendors that will say, adoption is if somebody has logged in once in 4 weeks. I ask, if your software developer has used one of these tools one time in a month, do you expect any productivity from that? So adoption should be, I'm using it all the time. So the way we're thinking about this from a software development perspective, is that you have to progress your users up a ladder of automation. And I'm going to talk here about software development, but we can use this same framework in any function. And so the notion is that there are essentially 5 levels. Level 0 is not using. I call this Luddite. So this is engineers that steadfastly refuse. I'm not going to use AI for anything. There aren't a lot of people there. Most people are at level 1. And this is, I'm using ChatGPT to answer questions instead of going and Googling a question. Gives me a more concise answer, especially if I'm using tools like a GitHub Copilot that I can have a chat that's right in my development environment. It's very easy for me to interact with. I don't have to go out of my environment. It benefits me. I get a little bit more productivity. But I'm not using it to write code. So the benefit is 5%. Level 2 is I'm now starting to use the tool to write code. So I'm now starting to either using the code completion where I'm typing and it types ahead, it suggests code, or in the chat I prompt it and I say, please write me a piece of code for a certain purpose. And I'm copying and pasting. I'm still not using this as the core of my workflow. It's an add-on. We're not yet in the world of agents. And so developers operating at this level, maybe 20%, 10% of their code, 20% of their code is AI written. You start to get that 20% kind of productivity lift. Where we're going is this level 3 and level 4. So level 3 is I stop thinking about, as a developer, I stop thinking about the code that I'm writing, and I start thinking about the feature that I'm creating. And so what I'm doing now is I'm not writing code, I'm writing prompts. I'm prompting the chat to edit multiple files. And so now I start to get maybe 50% of my code is AI generated. And then the top of the level is I go full agentic. This is, if you've heard the term vibe coder, this is being talked about quite a lot. But this is the idea that I don't write any code anymore at all. So we are training all of our developers on going all the way up this level, so using tools like Cursor and Replit and Codium. And when you get a developer to that top level, they will tell you, I'm never going back. This is the way that I'm going to develop code from now on. And the reason that this is important is because when I'm operating at that level, I'm no longer typing. My job as a coder is not to type code. My job is to think about architecture. My job is to think about what features do I want. I'm outsourcing the typing and the coding to the agent. And when I type that 3-line prompt that describes the feature that I want, the agent types 1,000 lines of code. That's the kind of speed up that I'm getting. So we're still very early on this journey. Most of the developers I talk to don't believe that they can be at level 4. By the way, if you go to Silicon Valley, there are probably some of you in this room, the AI native startups that are starting right now, the startups that are in Y Combinator right now, they're at level 4. This is how they're writing their software. Those are your future competitors that are going to be writing code 10 times, 20 times, 50 times faster for the same number of developers. So this is software development. I think the same thing is going to happen in every function. And we will go from this evolution of we have chatbots that we're using to answer questions. That's helpful, but doesn't change the way that we work fundamentally. To we start to have tools where we are starting to delegate some of our tasks to those tools, to finally getting to a place where we have agents that we just instruct, here's the task that I want completed, here's the objective that I want, and it goes and takes care of it. But we're going to have to change the way that we think about work, and we're going to have to get the people to come along in the process. I'll let you read the cartoon. There is resistance. There are a lot of reasons why people don't want to adopt these tools. When we talk to engineers, they will tell you all sorts of things. I tried it once and it didn't work, or I tried it once and it gave me a bad answer. I'm a better coder than the AI, so I don't believe in using it. My favorite was I was talking to one engineer who said, "Yeah, I'm a better coder than the AI," and I said, "Okay, that's fine. Let's assume that that's correct. But 20% of your time, you might be doing something really complicated. So why don't you focus on the complicated stuff and then use the AI tools to do the documentation, unit test, boilerplate, the easy stuff." And he said, "Well, I like to do that because I type, I feel like I'm being productive." And that was the key. I feel like I'm being productive. Of course, the value of that work is 0. So we have all these stories that we tell ourselves about why I can't use these tools. I think it boils down to really three reasons. One is I don't know that the tool can do it. I'm not aware. Or I tried it once and it didn't work very well. But remember what I said at the beginning. We're going to have 10,000 times more power in 3 years. This is an exponential tool. If you thought it was bad yesterday, just wait 2 weeks. So we have to get people over this hump of saying it can't possibly do what I think it can do. We have to get them to believe that it works. The second is we're all very stuck in our ways. We have habits. There's a way that we work. I'm an HR professional. This is how I write a job description. Well, why are you writing a job description? You should not write job descriptions. You should let the AI write the job description. Yeah, but I do it. So we are stuck in the way that we work, and we have to get people out of habits. And then the third reason, and this is the hardest one, is we have our own identity. Again, if I stick with software developers, I'm a coder. I write code. That's how I define myself. I'm special because I know this arcane language that most of the world doesn't know. And now you're telling me that this AI actually can do that, and I don't need to know this arcane language anymore. Who am I? That's a very hard thing, and we're going to have to deal with that in every function, in every profession, where people start to say, wait, I thought that I had this skill that made me special, and the AI now can do it. We can get through this, And as I said earlier, the engineers that have really adopted using agentic coding, they're excited. They will tell you, I'm never going back. They love working in that way because what it has done, it has elevated them from being a typist to being an architect. It's elevated them to thinking about what's the impact I want to create. They can create much more. They can create much faster. So we have to find for every one of our jobs, what is that thing that elevates the person, the human. So we think that there are 6 key things, and this might be another good slide to photograph. 6 key things to get people through these adoption challenges. The first is you have to have the right tool. You have to have the tool integrated. You have to have it in the right place. When we were doing some work at a bank, they were launching GitHub Copilot, which is a fine tool, but there were all sorts of reasons why their version was restricted. And in fact, when we started to train their developers, every third query, every third prompt that the developers would put in the tool, they would get back this message that said the response has been filtered. There was some, over-eager security checks that had been put in the system that were filtering every third response. Well, if you're trying to convince software developers to use this tool, and 1 in 3 times it basically fails, pretty quickly they start to say, this tool doesn't work, I don't want to use it. So you've got to have the tool working, it's got to be in the right place, it's got to be integrated with the way that people work. The second is you need to give them explicit instruction. It's not enough to just deploy something. We actually have to tell them how it works and how it should work in their context. How do they apply it to their job? How do they change their job? If we're going to change the workflow, how is the workflow going to change? We have to bring them on that journey. The third thing is you have to focus on adoption early on. And you have to measure adoption in the right way. As I was saying, logging in once in a month does not count as adoption. What is it that really counts? How do you know? In software development, you know if you can measure the percentage of AI-generated code. You can decide what you want that percentage to be, but that should be the measure of, am I actually using this effectively? And so you have to measure it, and then you have to recognize early adoption. The key in the beginning is just getting people to use it. You can get them up the curve of using it more effectively and using it to get more productivity, but if they're not using it, you're not getting anywhere. The fourth thing is you need to celebrate the champions, the ones that are really being successful. Longer term, everybody in the organization is going to see that the people that are using the AI tools, those are the ones that are getting promoted, those are the ones that are succeeding, those are the ones that are getting the bigger bonus, the better positions. At that point, everybody will come on board. But early on, you don't have those visible wins yet. So you need to celebrate the champions, create those people that can be the navigators for the rest of the organization, and elevate them so that everybody sees that being on board, using these tools in your work actually is recognized. And then the last two things go together. So if I give you these tools that are going to make you much more productive, but I let you keep the same resources you have, you don't have a lot of incentive to use the tools. So you have to ramp up the scarcity. I have to start taking away your resources. I'm expecting you to do more. I'm giving you tools you can do more. I expect you to do more. Therefore, you don't need as many people, as much budget, whatever it is. But if we're only ramping up scarcity, then we're just creating a treadmill for our people. Right? It's not a very good experience as the employee to say, okay, here's these tools, now go run 100 times faster. So we need to pair this with really rethinking work. And the way that we talk about this is the goal is to minimize toil and maximize joy. When we look at, I spoke earlier about this idea of redesigning processes end to end. And I'll give you an example. We were working with a bank. They had launched a chatbot for their equity research group. They have 1,000 people in equity research. This chatbot summarized their equity research. Well, they have 5 people that summarize equity research. So the maximum impact you would get from this chatbot is maybe 2 FTEs out of 1,000. The right answer was to go and look at the whole end-to-end process of equity research. What did the researchers do? And there's about 100 different activities. So we looked at all of those activities. And then we took those activities and said, which are toil and which are joy? Where is their work toil, that is manual work, can be automated, it's low value, it's also not very fulfilling for the people. And where is their joy? What is the thing that the people really like? What do they bring to their job? Now, automate the toil and keep the joy. Don't take away the things that people like in their job. And by the way, when you do that, and then you read that back to the people in the work, they'll say, yeah, all that stuff that you said was toil, I would love if that went away. I don't like doing that. So pairing this idea of finding the joy, minimizing the toil, with taking away resources so that we're starting to get more out of everybody is the key. So I'll leave you with 5 kind of macro questions that sort of wrap this all up. First is, so this is what should the C-suite be considering, right? So the first is, where do I want to create value? What are the right use cases? What are the right functions? Where can I really re-engineer my work using AI, using agents? Of that, where can I fund the journey? So what are the couple of things, what are the big rocks that I can attack now that are going to have a payback, that I can use that payback to fund my additional development? I need to make sure I've got the right technology infrastructure in place. So do I have the data? Am I in the cloud? Do I have the right technology vendors, partners, platforms, et cetera? I need to focus on change. Much of what I've talked about today is this idea of how do I actually get people to adopt and get people to change. So I actually have to have a focused change program. It can't be a technology-led program. It has to be technology and business. And then the last, and I have to end on this, I have to be sure I've got the right guardrails to deploy AI responsibly. So with that, I'll just leave you with the thought that by 2030, you will have far more AI agents in your business than you have people. It's time to start preparing for that now. Thank you.